Muy buenas tardes. Muchísimas gracias.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for being with us at this meeting, bringing together some very relevant leaders of Latin America. And I would like to welcome you all. Here we have the President of Ecuador, Mr. Guillermo Lasso, the President Rodrigo Chaves from Costa Rica, President Petro from Colombia, the Vice President Raquel Peña from the Dominican Republic, and the Minister of Finance of Brazil, Mr. Fernando Haddad. We all know that the combination of a number of international crises have had an impact in Latin America. And this impact has been felt even more strongly because of the legacy of the pandemic. However, Latin America is also rich in resources, and it has many different ways to propose interesting solutions, not only for the economies and also for the societies of that continent. And many of the solutions and proposals that we find in Latin America could be an example for the rest of the world. So we are now going to focus on what can Latin America offer to the world. And, well, the Minister of Brazil, the Vice President, and the President are perfectly well placed to help with that. I will start with President Lasso. We need to acknowledge that inflation has been one of the big problems affecting not only Latin America, but also the world as a whole. And you had an impressive record, and you managed to strike a very positive balance between tax deficit and social investments. You have an amazing track record on that. How did you strike that balance? Thank you very much, first of all, for this invitation. It seems extremely interesting to me to be here and share the experiences of different Latin American countries. And I would like to greet the President of Colombia, the President of Costa Rica, the Vice President of the Dominican Republic, and the Minister of Finance of Brazil. Everything starts from having a very wisely managed the pandemic. We did that with effort and with dedication. We always said that managing the pandemic was a plan, part of the economic plan of Ecuador. We managed to vaccinate 52% of the population in the first few days of coming to power to try and boost the economic recovery of the country. And we managed that because by 2021, on the first year after the pandemic, or after part of the pandemic, in the aftermath, we managed 4.2% growth, which was very relevant for Ecuador. And in 2022, we managed to put public finances in order. When I came to power, the fiscal deficit was 7.7% of the GDP, and we finished 2022 with 1.7%. So the reduction was 6 points on the GDP. Our economic growth in 2022 was 3.2%, and we managed to generate jobs. We reduced the number of people under the poverty line in Ecuador, and if you ask me where the secret is, we managed to fight corruption. And I think that fighting corruption and keeping public spending and public spending under tabs frees resources to invest in social affairs. Our investment this year is going to account for 51% of the central government budget, and that will be devoted to social causes. Thank you very much, President Petro. Social justice is one of the pillars of your government, and the social debt is huge in the region, and the forecast on poverty increase is a reason for concern. You have promoted a set of reforms in Colombia, and in the previous plenary session, you laid out your vision on sustainability and decarbonization. What about the economic area? The tax reform was already passed. And what are the drivers to promote productivity and growth and to bring more investment to Colombia? Growth and investment. First of all, let's try and express an idea that I have in my mind, because this is a topic that has become essential in this forum. The climate change has become, for me, a sort of a lens to look at micropolitics and macropolitics, our own policies and global policies. And so far, it has sort of worked. It helps us build a narrative. If we look at South America, we can see we have two big potentials regarding the climate crisis. One is the Amazon forest. We could discuss about that another day, but this involves a set of, a coalition of governments that have territorial responsibilities on the Amazon forest, and the creation of a sort of a world fund with our contribution, because this is the third climate pillar of the world, if we're able to revive the Amazon forest. But the second huge potential we have in general, all countries in Latin America, is our ability to generate clean energies. It is very hard in Europe or in the United States or in Africa and in large parts of Asia. However, with the existing technologies, if we manage to build an American electricity grid from the Patagonian area to Alaska, we would be able to sell our potential of clean energy to help the US change its energy mix. And that is the first element to find a solution to the worldwide energy crisis, because if the US don't change, there's nothing to do. And they have trouble to achieve that, and Latin America could help them do that. So this could lead us and draw up a sort of an agenda, not only a joint agreement with technical and political elements. This grid is almost built, but the sources of clean energy require minerals, for instance, like manganese or copper. And these minerals could be used as oil and coal and are used in the old economy. We could sell them raw, or else we could start industrialization processes so that we could all build the turbines ourselves and generate the clean energy that could be transported through cables or even through the sea if it was turned into hydrogen. And Colombia is part of these opportunities. What would be the necessary investments? Well, those that would help us develop those initiatives. We would go from a matrix of investment that is based on oil and coal to a new matrix of foreign investment focused on the construction of South American clean energies with a captive market, because if we use the electrical grid, well, the United States, and if it's through the sea, well, we could expand even further. And that could help us in our industrialization process. And this takes me, and sorry if I'm being too long, the reforms that we want in the economic sector have to do with the production and not only productivity, because how can we leave an extractivist kind of economy? Because the South American economy is basically extractive. You draw things from the soil or from the earth, and then you sell things without transforming them. How can we move from that to a productive economy that generates more jobs and that can have increasing revenues and not decreasing revenues, such as oil and coal? And that should be necessarily linked to the earth, to the water, to agriculture, farming, to industrial agriculture, industrial farming, and to knowledge. Latin America and Colombia should build the society of knowledge in the midst of this energy transition. This could help us leap forward and cover the ground where people from Southeast Asia, took certain advantages when they were poorer than ourselves. And I will leave it at that. Thank you very much. Your message was very clear, Mr. President, and this gives me an ideal segue to ask President Chaves, Costa Rica is being well integrated in the supply chains, and its higher participation in global supply chains and in regional supply chains, as President Petro said, can promote long-term economic growth. What is Costa Rica doing to become more integrated, and how can we create more of a Latin American economic integration and make it more real, more plausible? How can we get better results to make sure that that legacy remains and the legacy of these leaders remains? Thank you very much, Marisol, for the invitation. I would like to greet Fernando, Ms. Vice President, and the two presidents. Let me start by your diagnosis. Costa Rica has done very well by including itself in supply chains. We have a huge foreign direct investment in medical appliances, electronic components, microprocessors, and the aerospace industry, or car components, and also in the back office shared services. This has created a very dynamic part of the economy, which has pulled the country towards a higher prosperity, despite of the fact that this might, well, in the future destroy part of our income. But how have we achieved that? Well, to start with, Costa Rica has got an important brand in the current modern world. Consumers, especially young consumers, are interested not only in price, but also in quality. And they're also interested in how things are produced and under what labor conditions and where. Costa Rica, over the years, has invested in having an energy mix, and I fully agree with President Petro that was 100% based on renewable energy in practical terms. That's extremely good. That helps businesses comply with their sustainable development goals. And then we also have democracy, freedom of expression, gender parity, respect for minorities, and this all together builds a very powerful brand. We have also introduced changes over the years to improve investment, but that's not enough. This government, we've been in power for 8 months, is taking important measures to open up our markets, and we will soon sign a free trade agreement that President Lasso and myself discussed last May. We met in LA and, well, proposed to sign up, to draw up a free trade agreement. It will be a pleasure, Mr. Lasso, to host you there to sign this. And we are also trying to join the Pacific Alliance. We also have free trade agreements with China, Europe, the United States, and so on. And we are trying to join the CTPP, and we've also tried to improve the business environment in the sense that in order to attract foreign direct investment in high technologies, we have removed lots of the red tape, and for the traditional sectors, we are removing 164 bottlenecks for investments, such as account reporting and some regulations that don't make any sense any longer. And we also have a people, planet, and prosperity strategy. The 3 Ps: people, planet, and prosperity. And this is improving the distribution chains. And to be frank, Marisol, at a time when the world is seeing a shrinking foreign direct investment, our outlook is extremely positive, and we hope to continue being part of these value chains. And we are discussing, maybe I should not tell you too much, but we are also discussing with countries that we didn't have a commercial relationship so far, and things are going well in this sense. How can we have a better integration in Latin America? We are doing our part, and so is doing Ecuador, and we hope that the different members of the Pacific Alliance will welcome us: Mexico, Colombia, Peru, Chile. And let's hope that together we can come up to the world. And that requires to understand that all these changes are going to create winners. For instance, more trade, more investment, winners in large amounts and a few losers. But these few losers have political powers, and they have had an influence on the elections. They control the media, and we need to fight that. And we need to fight that internally in every single country to make this pie grow. That's the vision we have. Let's hope it works well for all of us.
I also hope so, Mr. President. I think that Latin American integration is a dream for all of us, and let's hope to go forward with this. Vice President, President Chaves talked about the supply chains and value chains, but more than 70% of the productive base in our region, Latin America, are SMEs. How can we assure that the open trade benefits reach SMEs? Yes, of course. Thank you very much, Marisol, and greetings to our three friends here, and Mr. Minister from Finance from Brazil. President Luis Abinader applied some strategies, focused strategies, as Mr. Lasso has said, very efficiently to fight the pandemic. And this enabled us to open immediately our economy. And in 2022, we ended with 5.5% economic growth, having had to deal with very difficult economic situations. The businesses in Dominican Republic, of course, you said that SMEs are 70% of our productive base, but our president has focused special attention on 98% of businesses, and there has been reinforcement of the existing businesses, but also help to entrepreneurs to go on setting up new businesses. And we have given very high amounts to financing, to soft finance these businesses, but also to the skilling, improving the skills of all the population to reinforce our economic growth and for them to be every day more and more competitive. But it was necessary for them to access more and more markets. And President Abinader instructed the government to buy or to take into account all these businesses as the state suppliers. And this was absolutely fabulous because immediately their sales grew up. And that's the way they have been growing in each of the areas where they operate. But also through the huge development that we are having in free tax zones, well, most of the businesses there are having the SMEs as raw material suppliers. So that has enabled us to make something possible, which was one of the main targets of President Abinader, which is the creation of jobs. Creations, good jobs creation, and this, thank God, is something that we can show to the world. We're very well positioned in SMEs. And all this has led us to reinforce SMEs, and many of them are now exporting their products. Thank you very much, Vice President. Thank you very much, and we wish you success.
Yesterday, we talked about the challenges of Brazil and also the many opportunities that Brazil may use. Now that we're sharing with important Latin American leaders, could you please tell us about your vision on the role that Brazil will have for the economic development of the Latin American region? Minister, you have the floor. Thank you, Marisol. It's a pleasure to be here as always. And I would like to also thank for the three presidents and the vice presidents for their presence here with me. Actually, as President Lula has a style of government. He did increase Brazil's relationships with the rest of the world as we've never seen before. We've never had such an increase of the trade in Brazil as during the Lula government. And this is due to the fact that our diplomacy was very active during these 8 years. Not only did we deny participation in international forums, but we even activated diplomacy so that we could have Brazil and Latin America have a real voice in all these forums. Brazil is in the G20, in the BRICS, in Mercosur, and in many international bodies. And this helped Brazil a lot to grow in the world during the 8%, during the 8 years of Lula's government. Brazil grew 4% when the world was growing 2%. And the international scenario was favorable, but when we see which countries benefited from it, Brazil was the one that benefited the most, and especially its economy. After Lula's presidency, all presidents around the world looked at Brazil with generous eyes because we understand that regional integration is absolutely necessary for development. And that's how President Petro said we have the same vision concerning the competitive advantages of our subcontinent with relation to the world. And the generation of clean energy has remarkable specificities, whether it's sun energy, wind, or now green hydrogen. I mean, these all show extraordinary benefits with regards to other types of energies, but this has a limitation, and the limitation may be the other competitive advantage we may have. It's hard to transport it. Hydroelectric, wind, or sun energy can be transported. And the president also said that it can be linked with other countries in America, but it can also attract companies and industries that do want to produce with clean energy, so their whole productive network meets environmental goals. And so we can make our continent the center of clean energy production. But this is not enough. To me, this is necessary. This is a decisive element for the green transition, but I think that we need to integrate our markets to reach a considerable scale. And this is another important element for external markets compatible with our needs. And this will give us a higher quality employment for our workers. And also it will bring investments in education that are necessary. But we also need another type of investments, because our region nowadays has an important deficit. So to be at the scale of the markets is not a side question. It's a central session. There are 3 blocks now. The EU-US, which are federation. Europe, it's almost a federation. China is a world on their own. But if we think of regional integration, I think we will have a hard time even if we do free trade agreements, which are welcome in some cases, but still, I think that regional integration goes through infrastructures, trade agreements, the strengthening of Mercosur that was abandoned in the last years, and it goes through having new members in the Mercosur. And this conditions are higher than the ones we show here. And it will be hard for the region to be part of the world with specific possibility to bring well-being for the 4.0 industry, ecological transition, and all the benefits we can get. All this will depend on the way we behave between ourselves. It will not depend on each of us with relationship to the world, but we will depend on the regional integration. If we look at Latin America nowadays, we see great opportunities in Colombia, in Argentina, in everywhere. You find opportunities that would be better, more beneficial if we had trade integration, and even if we are more ambitious, the integration of financial markets in the region, because they lack competitivity and free and cheap financing, and also to give loans to low-income families. And also we need to help small companies. And so all this would be easier in Latin America, and especially in South America, if we're more integrated. Thank you, Minister. I think this is a great opportunity for an economic integration in Latin America and also in South America.
We have a huge challenge here. We just have 2 minutes to end this session. I would have liked to go on with this fascinating conversation, but we'll have to rationalize our time. We'll have to be lean, and I wouldn't want to miss the opportunity of asking President Petro about the vision that he has to lead Colombia to peace, total peace. Mr. President Petro. Colombia has lived for decades in violence. We used to call it perpetual violence. And that's why world history has changed, and we've gone through the revolutions during the Cold War, and now we're going through a very difficult phase, much more complex, because the other one was only political, but this one is linked to problems that are being experienced in all of the rest of the countries, which has to do with drugs. And it has to do with a policy that is implemented worldwide about drugs. 50 years ago, we started criminalizing and fighting a war against drugs. But if you make a balance in the Americas, what happened these last 50 years? Well, the only thing that we can say is that it's total. We've been completely defeated. There are millions of prisoners in the United States, most of them black, 1 million deaths in Latin America, most of them Colombian organizations that are not those that are showcased on TV like Pablo Escobar. They are real multinational, absolutely powerful, that transfer drugs over the world. And in Latin America, we have the most violent cities in the world. So it's not only a problem in Colombia, it's a problem in Latin America, because we have really multinationals, and even in Mexico, there are criminals there that dominate the scenes. This complexity is the basis of today's violence in Colombia. And this cannot be solved only with political instruments. We invented a word for this in the public debate. We talk about socio-legal instruments. What does this mean? This means that we cannot pacify Colombia if we don't have a territorial and a macro vision. if we don't debate about our anti-drugs policies, which is a failure today, and if we don't speak about this with the United States, we'll have serious problems. But this dialogue shouldn't only be held between Colombia and the United States, between among the rest of the Latin American countries and the rest of the world, because we need to decriminalize this and mostly focus on prevention and teaching, learning, because this is much more effective than filling up our prisons. But this is part of a debate, the debate of the peace, about peace in Colombia. And of course, we cannot pacify if the marginalized regions in Colombia where all these violent actions take place are not included in social policies. We would need to ask ourselves, how can we include the largest cocaine production region in the world, which is in the border with Mr. Lasso's country, which is Tumaco. It's the only region in the Pacific which is poor in the world, the only region, because, for instance, all the regions in Ecuador, in the Pacific area, are rich, and let alone Asia, for instance. This is the only region that has most of its population from black communities. So the slave mentality that exists in Colombia has excluded this region, which is now the first cocaine producer, because it goes without having to go through any mountains directly to Japan and even to the east of the United States. So which would be the way to include this region, respecting its black culture in a prosperity system where the world could even help them. I'm going to give you an example. Instead of cultivating coke, which takes hundreds of millions of hectares, we could produce cocoa. But we would need to transform it there to manufacture it as chocolate. And Nestle here, the multinational, would maybe be one of the main instruments to achieve peace in Colombia. But we need, of course, to change the world policy for fighting drugs, which is a total failure. Thank you, Mr. President. It's a very interesting vision. But unluckily, we need to close here. I would have loved to go on asking you questions and sharing here ideas which are absolutely important. But let's hope that your agenda here in our annual meeting will still be fruitful. There will be other sessions, other meetings where the presidents, the vice president, and the minister will take part, maybe not focusing on Latin America specifically, but yes, on other subjects that are specific to, well, other topics. For instance, tomorrow there'll be a very important session about the Amazon, so don't miss it. We all believe that the green growth will be a very important engine for the growth in Latin America in general, and the Amazon region plays a very important role. Ecuador has consolidated as a huge champion. Costa Rica has an excellent track record. Colombia and Brazil also take part of the Amazon region. So be with us tomorrow. Thank you.